Welcome to AEC Stories. This is former SM-3 Dempsey of the USS Mount Hood. And today I have a special guest from another ship, and all shipmates are family to me. And it's really cool to hear about what life was like on a different kind of vessel, because though the Mount Hood is great, and that's where I was always interested in other ships, especially battleships, because we did unrep with them and we saw them shoot their huge 16-inch guns, which were monsters, and we saw them in the Persian Gulf when we were there for Desert Storm. And here's my guest, Billy Horr. Welcome aboard, Billy.
Hey, thanks for having me today. It's real cold out here in Baltimore, so I'm glad I'm inside doing this, that's for sure.
Well, I saw your number was Florida. Did you
I spent 10 years I spent 10 years in Tampa. After I got out of the military, after 20 years, I went and graduated from USF and also the police academy in Tampa as well.
Oh, wow. So the Navy, was that a family tradition or something you just decided to do out of high school?
Yeah, actually, it's a family tradition. My brother was also in for 4 years. He was on AE-27 USS Butte out of Earl, New Jersey.
Oh, cool. So there's some AE family where there's a tie.
Yeah, he loved it. But he got out, went and graduated from Siena College there in Albany, and went on to become a police officer. He's currently a police officer in Baltimore County.
Well, that's cool. So you're an East Coast guy originally?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Albany, New York, and went into the Navy right after high school, and went in for 20 years, got out for like 6 months, started getting into a little trouble, and I was like, man, I better go back in before they don't take me. And I went back in and stayed in for 20 years. But I wasn't really good at the Navy, but I was adequate, I would say, because I got out and retired as an E5, which is borderline,
Right.
So, but at the end of the day, I get a pension, and I'm very blessed, man, that I did 20 years and I got out and became a decent human being.
Well, it's interesting. I coasted. I played Mr. Screwball for my first 3 years, as I told you earlier. And then I became Mr. Navy. And it's like I get to see both sides of it. But I was out by 6 years, and the last year was in Medhold from a motorcycle wreck. And, I was like, what if I'd really put my effort into it? But I think, if you get out as E5, you did it your way. You enjoyed the Navy your way. I think that's the best way to look at it, right?
Yeah, I had a great time, man, and I want to get a shout out to some of my Battleship mates that are on Facebook with me. We still friends after almost 30 years. It's Eric Totsky, Mike Seals, Ricky Kramer, Charlie Frakes, and of course, Big Vic King, who was like one of my sea daddies, man. The guy was he's a minister now, but he was like one of my sea daddies that said, look, this is how we're going to do things here. And, because when I joined the Navy, man, I was a punk kid. But you straighten up real quick, man, when you get on that battleship, because they don't tolerate that stuff. When I joined the Navy, I didn't know what restriction was. I didn't know what, certain Navy terms were, but I never got in trouble. I ended up getting out of the Navy after 20 years, like I said, and I never went to captain's mast. These guys took really good care of me in the beginning.
So you just get out as a civilian, like, oh, this is trouble. I need to go back to some more structured living.
Oh, yeah.
This is
When I went back to Albany, man, it was a disaster. I'm actually from Troy, but the city was turning in a bad way, because you got to understand that was the 80s. The drug deals and the cocaine.
The culture was growing. Yeah.
Nobody was doing marijuana, is what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. So, the music came out all about that stuff back then, too. Music was all about drugs in the 80s.
Exactly. So I went back in after 6 months, and I didn't look back. But the other good thing is I got real lucky on my duty station. And that's another thing, but we'll talk about the battleship for now.
Yeah, the battleship. I mean, you were on that thing for, what were you saying, a few years right there, right?
83 to 87, yes, sir.
So that's a hell of a ship. Not only is it fast, it's almost bulletproof. It's made to withstand a nuclear blast. I was so told, like if they hatched up all the decks and everything, it was made to roll over and end up back on top of the waterline. Like if it get knocked over by a wave, it could technically roll over the way the hull was designed and pop back up.
Oh yeah, the hull was 16 inches of steel. So,
Right.
it's very sad. We talk about today these ships being hit, and there was no way ever that I could ever see the battleship being hit by another ship. One, it was pretty thick, so it would probably just bounce. And two, there's so many guys up there on the bridge that there's no way that would ever happen. No way. I just, I'm flabbergasted how I see 2 ships get hit in the last 6 months. That's ridiculous.
That's been a big topic on my podcast. I don't know if you heard any of them, but yes.
Yeah. The thing of it is you got to wonder what these guys are doing up there.
Right.
And I don't say they're not trained, because you never want to Monday morning quarterback Navy guys. You should never, ever Monday morning quarterback, because you don't know what's going on.
True.
So I can't, because you're not there. You don't know what's going on. But you also wonder, man, what are they doing up there? Because the bridge is like sacred land. Like, you're not allowed up there. Like, when I was a cook, I would bring up food to these guys all the time. Cookies, brownies, small ham and cheese sandwiches, so these cats could eat,
Nice of you.
I never ever let my shipmates go without food, man. Never. Because we had so much on the New Jersey. We had the best budget,
Yeah, you guys did. I mean, the New Jersey, I think we, there's a video I have of our ship unrepping the Missouri, or one of those ships. And one of the battleships for sure. It's on the AEC story page. Somebody had video of the 80s or 89 or something. I was like, oh, awesome. Because I'm trying to get like 12 hours of footage of our ship that our JO just filmed. But, it's crappy VHS footage that needs to be converted.
Okay. Yeah, that ain't CD-ROM you got it on, that's for sure. The battleship, I had to know about ships. I was a signalman, so I had to know what I was looking at on the horizon through the big eyes identify, because sometimes the radars didn't get an exact reading, or they weren't emitting an electronic signature, which they could totally, confer what it was, right? So I had to be able to identify them by silhouette, even up to 18 miles away. And the battleship I read about, I go, damn, this thing's fast. And then other people would tell me, yeah, and it's bulletproof, and it's just it can roll up on shore and just take anybody on, like the aquatic super tank. And those guns that had the biggest guns in the fleet, the 16-inch guns, I mean, those things were monsters. Yeah,
What was it like on seeing those things fire off and all that?
Oh my God, man. It's like this big, huge flame in front of you, and it was so loud. Like, you got to understand, man, the culture of the Navy changes. Like, the battleship in the 80s, this was Ronald Reagan's boat. Like, if he had a problem, he would send a battleship. You know what I mean? If he needed to show American force, which we did up in the Sea of O in Russia, he sent a battleship. He wouldn't send a Knox-class frigate or, CGN, because the CGNs, there was a Long Beach back then. That was like the nuclear-powered cruiser. He didn't send that up to the Sea of O. He sent the battleship. But you got to also understand the USO shows that were on there when we were in Beirut. We got to meet Bob Hope, Brooke Shields, Wayne Newton. Who's that cat that's from Tennessee that sings "God Bless America"?
The country singer that's no longer popular.
Yeah.
Garth Brooks.
No, not Garth Brooks. He's an older cat. But anyways, these are the type of people that came on the battleship. Cher came on the battleship to film her video. So the battleship was basically a showboating piece of machinery, but with a lot of firepower. So it was very, very Hollywood type.
You had a good sized crew on there, like 1,000 or something like that.
No. It was more than that. It was 2,500.
2,500. Okay, you got me. See, I'm supposed to know that, but
yeah. No,
it was a huge boat for that kind of boat that wasn't a carrier, that wasn't a supply ship with all the extra space, but it was long.
And just to note, it's a museum now in Philadelphia, and I tell you, I went up there, me and Ricky Kramer, and we met there, and we cried, man. Like, everything is in the same spot. Our racks are in the same spot. The galley's in the same spot. The mess decks are in the same spot. Ship's library's in the same spot. The soda machines are in the same spot. The wardroom's in the same spot. Dental and medical are still in the same spot. So when we went up there, man, it was an awesome trip, man. I got to tell you, if you're ever on the East Coast and you got a chance to go visit it, I definitely recommend it.
So where is it out of again?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia? Okay.
Yeah, it's a museum.
we have the Hornet out here. I wasn't on the Hornet, but it was cool. That was the first time I went on a carrier, even though I was in the Navy. There was one parked next to me. I'm like, I want to go on Liberty. I don't care to go on that carrier, but we'd be pierside with them in Alameda. But yeah, the Long Beach, you just brought that up. That was an interesting looking cruiser with kind of like a square box on the top. Yeah, it was long and box on the top. Yeah, that used to be. We used to unrep with them, and it was cool, man. I mean, the Battleship. I didn't know. Some guys knew. You might have had more Navy culture than me because I was an Army brat, so I didn't know what I was looking at. I was like, "Oh, cool, Navy." It was. I only joined.
When I dropped on the Battleship from an H-60 helicopter, I took a lot of pictures, so I knew what I was getting into, but you got to read up on that stuff, man. I read up on it, and the history, the Battleship New Jersey, you got to understand, was a World War II ship. It was in World War II, it was in Korea, it was in Vietnam, and then for Beirut.
And that thing held its value through decades.
Yeah. The funny thing is, man, people are funny these days, and I don't get all political because I'm staying out of it, but they go, "Oh man, we're going to attack North Korea and they're bringing the battleship back." And I'm telling these people, I'm like, "You're butt-ass crazy, dude. You are simply out of your mind." One, that era is long over with. We fight beyond the horizon, not below the horizon nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, it's getting closer to that movie where every year it gets closer to that movie where Jamie Foxx and those other pilots were chasing the drone plane that decided to get its own attitude and destroy everything.
Exactly. The battleships aren't needed anymore.
Well, they're downsizing crews. They're changing the layouts. They're automating a lot of things. But, excuse me, I think the problem that we're having with the ship hitting, and I tuned in on that. I blasted all over the internet about it because I was a signalman. It was my job to prevent that. I stood a tight watch, and I had better optics than the average bridge standing watch or anybody else, and I had the highest point of view. So, yeah, we were not sleeping on our jobs. That wasn't going to happen. So,
it's ridiculous.
Never even close. So today, you got to think you're future pacing, because I get out in 93, right? So I'm going, what would they be doing in the year 2016, 17? And I go, oh, they got cell phones on that ship. They got a little electronic toys. They have the digital warm blanket that just lures you away from your situational awareness.
Yeah.
And we had nothing but Navy to do when you were on the battleship.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, man, because I was on the battleship pre-internet days. There was no internet. There was no ATM machines that you cashed your check. Like, we had the guy in the mess decks with these 2 bags of money and a sidearm, and you formed that line, and you got your money in cash. You cashed your check, and you got your money in cash. So there was no ATM machine, there was no internet, and I'm glad we're talking because there's a couple of stories I need to point out. The first story is this. So I'm in Beirut, Lebanon during Christmas time, and the guy comes around and says, "Hey man, who wants to send electronic letters to your parents for Christmas? They'll be hand delivered Christmas Day." And dude, I'm doing cartwheels. I'm like, oh man, my mom's going to know I'm okay. She's going to get this electronic letter. So we lived at a dead end street. Now they call it cul-de-sac, but we lived at a dead end street. So my mom was looking out Christmas morning and she sees these 3 dudes walking down the driveway in black uniforms. She's like, oh no, I'm not answering the door. Oh no, this can't be true. So the guy kept knocking and knocking and knocking, and my mom wouldn't answer the door. So finally, my sister answered the door, and the guy gives my sister an electronic letter, and it's a letter wishing them Merry Christmas. She thought I died.
Oh, my gosh, that's funny.
Yeah,
it's kind of like,
I got killed, man. She wouldn't answer the door. Oh, that's a funny story, man. My mom just passed away recently, 2 years ago, and she always told that story. She said, "Billy, I wasn't going to answer the door. I thought you died." I was like, "Nah, Mom, they were just handing out Christmas letters."
That's funny. They roll up like the X-Files, like Mulder, exactly. And they look like the UFO people. You did not see anything.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
That's pretty cool. So on that ship, I mean, electronic letters in the early 80s, that's the closest as you're going to get to an email. It was delivered by 4 guys in black suits.
Yeah, 3 guys in black suits, three guys. And the other thing is there was no communication. Like if you needed to communicate home for like an emergency, like let's say your dad died and you needed to call home right away, you had to say, they would hook you up a patch line, but you had to say over. Like, Mom, this is Billy. I'm on my way home. Over. Yeah. I'm going to come on the next plane. I'll be home in 2 days. Over. So, yeah, you could communicate. It was through phone, but there was protocol for sure.
Well, that was probably through satellite phone. And, you know, it's interesting. I've done my research on the electronic evolution. I worked when I was a kid in 19, when you were on that ship, I was working at a TV station in Europe on an army base. They would make me work there like, it was one of my classes in high school. So I'd go there like 3 to 5 days a week and work there for 2 hours at Southern European Broadcast Network, which is like AFN, you know, all those different European, radio and television stations for armed forces, Army, Air Force, Navy.
AFN was awesome, man.
So I worked with that as an editor and on the video and stuff like that, and didn't pick up the camera till 20 years later, which was funny after I'd gotten out of the Navy. But, when I lived there, my father had us live in Europe for 17 years. He was a teacher on an army base. So we didn't have to move every 3 years, but all my friends would rotate just like the military. So I grew up in that culture. Their dad's getting stationed somewhere else or somewhere else, right? Few people stuck around because they had permanent jobs. But so you were out there, I was over here, and we're talking computer era that time. I was in computer class too. I remember this. We had the TRS-80, which is a computer that was black and white, and you needed a cassette player to upload the program, which took 2.5 hours. So a stick figure would pop up on the screen. And, then we had the teletype computers, which were similar to what they used to have in Radio Central, which are long gone. Like and, we had that. So we didn't have a lot of power there. And, you know, you made me think of this because I'm going on a side note. My friend and I were on on the Hornet, on a museum. And I go, shit, our ship had less computer power that I went to Desert Storm with than my cell phone. And then we're on the Hornet and we're looking at the space, the space capsule that was recovered with the ship. I go, Barry, my friend's Mr. Electronics. I go, Barry, how much horsepower and computer do you think they had in that capsule? He goes, oh, it's like a fax machine. I go, so we sent a fax machine to space.
Yeah, exactly. And, man, the technology today, like Baltimore had Fleet Week last year. They didn't have it this year, but last year. So I took my nephew, right? My nephew was 10 years old at the time, and he loved it, man. And I got a little bit teary-eyed because, I'm an emotional guy as it is. I'm already a wreck, but I took my nephew, man, and the CO let me walk the mess decks with them, the wardroom with them, the bridge with them. What do they call below the deck there where all the satellite and everything went on?
CIC?
CIC, yes, that's it. And he let me walk CIC with them. But the ship was amazing, man. The Jeffrey Dunham, it's named after a guy who sacrificed his life in war. He threw himself on a grenade. And I talked to the CO. I said, CO, you got 360 people on here, and 70 of them are females. How many people are on restriction? He goes, I don't have anybody on restriction. And I tested his integrity because, I asked another guy in the mess decks while he wasn't looking. I said, hey, man, how many guys are on restriction? He said, we don't have anybody on restriction right now. So can you imagine that? 350 people and not one person on restriction. Not one person.
I think we were more, this traces back. See, I'm building an algorithm in my head after I do enough podcasts. I gather the data, right? When I joined the Navy, there was a lot of cats on there. And I said this with Ortega, that there was a lot of guys that joined, like either go to jail or join the military.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was like the miniature side draft. The courts were shoving, medium level derelicts towards the military to try to straighten out their lives. So we had a lot of people that were prone to getting buck wild, right? And then they upped the standard since then.
Like you said.
So so nobody on restriction. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, nobody on restriction. So now I did my history as well. So, and one of my first friends on the ship was a master at arms. And I talked to him. I said, so what's the marijuana policy? He says, now the marijuana policy changed, of course, because all the pilots were flying these jets upside down on carrier. It was never nothing an E1 or E2 did. You got to understand that. So He said, well, in the beginning, the only way you could get busted for marijuana if it was in your reach. Like if you're sitting across the table and there's a joint in the middle of the table, then you get arrested for marijuana use because it's within your reach. And then, of course, the piss tests came along. So when I got on the Battleship, there was 16 people on restriction at one time. 16.
Wow. So, well, in the 80s, it depended also like how fast these rules hit the command. Like, oh yeah, we're going to implement this, and the ship's on a Westpac, and they don't get it till like a year later. You know, how stuff slowly cycles through, right? But I talked to guys from the 70s Navy, and they were like, man, that shit was everywhere because, you know, just imagine the Jimi Hendrix era. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you got to understand, like you said, it evolved. This is all evolved, and it wasn't because of an E1. It was because tailgate. It was because these pilots were flying jets upside down. They needed a bump. They needed cocaine to keep them awake to do these missions. You know, it wasn't Joe E1 on the painting the side of the ship hanging over all day. It wasn't because of him. It was because these officers were all doing these very important missions. So.
Well, I think there was, I'm not putting the Navy out there on blast or anything because I love the Navy, but things that got into the Navy, and the Navy has a quick way of identifying them and straightening them the hell out. Like you're going on restriction, you have a choice. We're going to kick you out, you're going to rehab, or you're going to walk tall and never do that shit again. Yes, sir. You know, and then the same thing with the flight guys.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten the female part. You know what I mean? Like that also evolved. You know, when they started saying females are coming on these ships, I mean, it's a cockfight. When you put one female with 20 guys, there's going to be a fight, or 30 guys. There's going to be a fight for sure. But I never saw that because I was always on ships with nothing but men. At the end, when I was on Hospital Ship Comfort, there were females, and it was trouble, dude. It was, and I like females, don't get me wrong, but it was trouble at the end.
Well, you're talking about testosterone and mixing with the feminine aspect. Now, we got women on board halfway through my deployment because I was in an auxiliary. So 3 years, it was the man's wild Navy, much like the one on your battleship, all alpha male, drinking, yelling, cussing, dirty magazines laying around and so forth, right? And smoking lamp was lit everywhere, and so was the attitude, and it was alpha male showdown, right? And then when the woman came on board, we had the numbers were highly in their favor. And I used to think to myself, and I have great female shipmates, and I'm not talking shit, but I used to think, did you join this because the action, the gettings were good or what? Because you certainly, if I was a guy that didn't do well in high school with the ladies or wasn't the prom king, and then I joined the Navy and it's like 400 women and 50 guys, suddenly I'm Magic Mike. You know what I mean? I don't know if anybody goes out of the line to say this. Sure, they joined it for a job and a career, but several of them married some of my shipmates, and they're still happily married. And they were in Desert Storm with us. So here they are married. They're married 30 years later, dude. Isn't that crazy? Like,
because when on the battleship, we all went to the Philippines. You know, we went to the Philippines twice, and there were definitely guys that were cheating. So, but you got, like I said, the culture of the Navy evolves constantly. You know, the technology, you know, what we bought 20 years ago is definitely out of date now, or what we bought even 5 years ago from the Navy is out of date. The policies continually change. So does it change for a good way? Does it change for a bad? Like there's no eval system now. You know that, right? They can kick you out at any day for anything. Like if they don't like the way you're working, you're gone. There's no questions asked. Wow. You can sign your contract and then you're gone. Like there's an eval system, but that's only a part of it. Because remember back in the day, the eval system was the way that you got made rank and stayed in. It was 4.0, 3.0, and it was like 4 copies. Like you had to write it down hard. You had to type it in very, very deep. So 1 copy went to you, 1 copy went to your chief, 1 copy went to your record, and 1 copy went to somewhere else, the Navy. So 4 copies of evals, and you had to type really, really hard.
Yeah, I get 4 O's at the end. I don't know what they were before. It's kind of like your GPA. You know, what's your GPA as a sailor, right? You know, it sounds like that
system was totally ridiculous, and that was one of the problems. But the other thing I need to tell you is that my family really, really supported me, man. I was very lucky to have a caring mother when I was on the battleship. Let me tell you another battleship story since I already told you one. My mother made cookies for the whole division. And I mean like the whole division. So I get this package in the mail one time in the Philippines, and I open it up, and I'm not lying, man, 600 chocolate chip cookies.
Nice.
My mother made 600 chocolate chip cookies. She said, Billy, I know you have 300 people in your division, 2 for each. All right. If there's leftovers, make sure the other guys in the divisions get them. And they were fresh, man. My mother wrapped those things like there was no tomorrow. She wrapped them in plastic wrap. Yep. She wrapped them in plastic wrap, paper napkin, and then foil so they wouldn't get wet. And then when we got them, everybody got them, man. And then everybody signed a thank you note and sent it to my mother, man. My mother, like I said, who just passed away 2 years ago, was a saint, man. She supported my Navy career. She always came to visit me everywhere. And my father had passed away. She visited me in Brunswick, Maine. But she always, and like I said, in our house, my brother was in for 4 years on USS Butte, and I was in 4 years on the battleship. Both of our pictures in our Navy uniforms were the 8x10s that were right next to our high school pictures.
Nice. That's nice to have that tradition, you know?
Yeah,
it's interesting. You were up in Maine. I was just there. I went there last summer with my wife. We get an Airbnb on a lake. We get this house on a lake. It was just a private lake. You know, there's so much water and lakes all over Maine.
Oh my God. I highly recommend Sebago Lake, man. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world in the summer. I got to tell you, man, I was very fortunate to be stationed in Maine.
Beautiful place. Well, I was born in New Hampshire, so I had an inkling of what it was about. And my mom lives on the Cape. So yeah, I'm familiar. East Coaster, but mainly transplanted as a European military brat because I left when I was 3. So I came back to the States with no point of reference, like what was home, you know? Now that I'm older, I get to discover it, but that's pretty cool, man. I mean, you chose to be a cook, and I talked to my friend who was a yeoman, and certain ratings do have their privileges, right? Don't you agree?
Yeah.
I mean,
being an MS, man, you never went hungry, and you definitely knew who to take care of. Like the postal clerks. Let me give you another example on the battleship. If you ever visit the battleship or a battleship, you'll see that the postal center is in midships, right next to our berthing. So I never had to worry about my mail, man. I just worked, you know, and I took care of those guys in the mail room. I made sure that they had ham and cheese sandwiches. They had fresh danishes, cookies, whatever they needed to do. And then I never worried about my mail. If I had mail, it was under my pillow at my rack.
Nice. You understood the horse trading and VIP and good camaraderie. I mean, that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the battleship, you know, there's different places to work. I worked in all of them. I worked in the chief's mess. I worked in the wardroom. I worked in the galley. I worked in the bake shop. So I worked in all of those in the 4 years that I was on there. And I always made sure I took care of people, man, even if they weren't giving me something back, because I had access to food, you know? And like I said, I told you 2 stories. I'm going to tell you one more. And this is an amazing story, man. So for 1 year, we're home we're in port for Thanksgiving in Long Beach, California. And I didn't go home for Thanksgiving because I wanted to go home for Christmas. So my friend who lived in base housing just had divorced his wife. And he said, Billy, if you get a turkey, I'll get the rest of the fixings and we'll have the best Thanksgiving ever. So me and my buddy came up with this plan to steal a turkey off the ship because we had just got done prepping. They split the shift up for Thanksgiving. If you stayed back in 2 shifts, you worked from 6 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, from 2 in the afternoon till 7 at night. We split the shifts so we could find some place to eat. So what we did is my buddy worked in the galley and he prepped all the turkeys. He goes, here, put this turkey in this coffee can, because you remember the coffee cans used to come in these big, huge number 10 cans. So I stuffed the turkey in the can, put clothes around it, put it in a sea bag, and walked off the brow with it, man. It was an amazing Thanksgiving, man. And I got it to the house, and my buddy's looking at me. He couldn't believe it. He goes, I don't know how you got it here, but I ain't asking questions. So I took it out of the coffee can, We had this, there was 4 of us at the dinner table that night, and we had the best Thanksgiving, man. I'll never, ever forget that. So I had this big, huge turkey. They got the rest of the stuff, and we sat there, we ate turkey, and we watched football, man. It was amazing. Like I said, the guys, I was very, very fortunate my first 4 years. Man, we had an amazing crew. The other guy I got to mention is Chavez, man. He's on my Facebook page, too. The guy was a Mexican immigrant, man, and he ended up being a police officer, and now he's retired and he owns his own car wash. I mean, that's the American dream. That's the American dream.
And people would work for the American dream back in the day. We'd have a lot of people from the Philippines joining the Navy and getting their citizenships, but they really liked the Navy. They're like, yeah, I got my citizenship, but I love the Navy. It's not like I'm going to quit this to go work at Xerox. Exactly. That was the thing, it's changed a lot. Now, Long Beach was a base. I never went on the base, but I went to San Diego for Ref Tray. You probably did too, I'm guessing.
Yeah, but San Diego, Long Beach is gone, man. They tore it's very sad. Everything is tore down. Everything is gone. There's not one thing left that reminds you if that Long Beach was there.
The analogy I make to that is that like you were in a cowboy movie like Clint Eastwood in Long Plains Drifter, whatever, High Plains Drifter. And you go back to the cowboy set 30 years later and all those buildings are falling over on the ground. It's like you never existed. And that's what it feels like here in the Bay Area. We have all the bases were just taken down. San Francisco was heavy on Navy bases. We had like 5 or 6,
You had the Presidio too, right?
The Presidio too. I mean, this has become Techville, but we were and I say this on our podcast, we were the predominant employer. Like, chicks wanted to marry a sailor because you had the job that people look at as a Google job today, because Silicon Valley had not flourished to the levels. I mean, there was IBM and a couple other computer companies, Xerox. It wasn't that big yet, Fujitsu. Now it's a 2.5 hour drive that used to take you 45 minutes, because the traffic, the people, and,
And the other reason why they did all that is because that real estate, man, is worth a lot of money. It's like millions and millions of dollars, man. That was the other reason, because time has evolved. Like a house back in Long Beach in the day was probably 80,000, and that was expensive for Long Beach back then. But that same property today is probably worth $750,000.
$800,000
for a house.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing. So you decided to move to the East Coast after you get out of the Navy?
Yeah, because you know what, man, I got out of the Navy and I was gonna try college, but it didn't work out. So, and I was finding myself being in trouble with the same crew. So I went right back in, man. I went right back in, and the guy said, no problem, man. We're taking a lot of NAVVETs. We'll get you back in and you go on your way. So I went to NAVVET training in Orlando, and I was back in, and then I got stationed in Maine, I got very lucky because that was my first duty station in Maine. I got stationed in VP 44. So, that's cool. And then I never got out, man. I never looked back.
Yeah, that's a nice place to be stationed. And so what areas did you live in? I mean, where were you stationed, like your major duty stations over 20 years?
In my 20 years, my first 4 years was the Battleship New Jersey. Then I got out for 6 months, and then I went to VP 44 for 2 years because they decommissioned. And then I went to USS Stump for 2 years. And then I went to Vieques, Puerto Rico for 4 years. And
wow.
That's a great story in itself because, as you can see what happened just recently, the hurricanes were there and destroyed the whole island, and nobody took care of them. Trump was off to Texas, Trump was off to Florida, but they didn't take care of Puerto Rico, which is a shame. Then after Vieques, the detailer says, listen, man, because Vieques, now you got to remember, was only a 1-year tour. Yeah. So the guy kept calling me back. There's 12 people stationed on Vieques.
Yeah.
12. And he goes, do you want to stay? He kept calling me at 1 year at a time. You want to stay? You want to stay? I said, man, why would you leave? There's only 12 people here. So I kept staying there for 4 years. And then finally the guy called me back. He says, listen, you got to go. So I said, all right. Yeah. And then he gave me this big, huge choice. He said, you want to go to recruiting school? I said, yeah, I'll go to recruiting school. So I went to become a recruiter, and then I got kicked out of there after 2 weeks because I got into a fight. No captain's mask. No. Just said, you're not recruiting type. You got to leave. So I ended up going to Bethesda Naval Hospital. So I was at Bethesda, and that's where I was at Ground Zero on the hospital ship Comfort. The Comfort went to Ground Zero for like 12 weeks or 10 weeks, something like that. I can't remember. And then after that, I went to a TWR in San Diego. Then I retired.
What's TWR?
Torpedo retriever. TWR.
Okay.
If you Google search it, it's a very, very.
You know, it's funny because I'm going from my familiarity. I know about the battleships. I know about the carriers. I know about the cruisers and the frigates and all that. But a TWR is a very, one of those abstract ships. I wouldn't have thought. Yeah, that's interesting.
Weapons torpedo. It's called Torpedo Weapons Retriever, and it's for sale too. They're trying to sell it now. You know what I looked.
You made me think of something. I was looking up, remember those barges we would have in certain dry docks? Were you ever on one of those? Those
barges, big, for people to sleep in while your ship was getting built.
The floating hotel. I thought about buying one and just pulling it into San Francisco and charging all the techies $1,000 a month per rack to live in it. But I found one for sale up in Washington, but it was $250,000, $250,000, which I don't have. And then it would probably cost me double that to just tow it down with another ship. You know what I mean? Down to San Francisco.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting fantasy. You think about what would I do if I had that?
Oh, but, the Navy has a lot of money now. They don't do that no more. They just put you up in a hotel or the barracks, because the barracks are all nice now. The barracks are beautiful, man. They're just like regular hotel rooms.
The new Navy has a barracks room and the ship. They don't live on the ship like we used to.
I know.
They have when they're in port. Now, I didn't know this. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
So I read this article recently, like the morale is down and people were really mad for being on this long patrol. We're like, shit, we used to do that standing on our heads.
Let me tell you something. Yeah. I never understood that term, morale is down. Listen, dude, you got a job and you're not living in Huck Finn, Arizona anymore. Don't say your morale's down, because what would your morale be like if you were living home? You know what I mean? And not having a job.
What if you attach that? The morale is down over at McDonald's. The police department's morale is down. The morale is down at Google.
I never understood that word, the morale is down, because, dude, I was happy to have a job. I never been ungrateful, man. I know I only retired in E5, but I'm going to tell you this, man. I was never, ever ungrateful for the people that I met, for the job that I had, and I was popping a paycheck every 2 weeks, because at the end of my career, I was probably making probably $900 every 2 weeks, because they paid for my place to live out in San Diego. So I'm never ungrateful, man. I think the people that say the morale are down are ungrateful people. You know what I mean? Oh, could it be better? Absolutely could be better.
You get to live it. You get to live at sea. You get to go to every beautiful beach, port. You get to travel the world. That's one thing that the Navy had over a lot of other forces. Because I always make this analogy: you could have joined the Air Force and get stationed in somewhere abstract, or the Army. Like, you're in Pocatello, Idaho, and population 5,000. So first of all, you're a single young man. There's no ladies to date. Second of all, there's not much activity. You're bored, and there's 4 years of your life, and you're obligated. Whereas
I always believe that your morale came within.
Yeah. I had a great time. I just didn't realize it half the time. That's all. You're young and you think you know what you want, but usually when you're young and those are your formative years in the Navy, you're kind of looking at it like, hey, I could be out there making lots of money being a stockbroker, and I'd have a BMW and live up in Beverly Hills. That's living. And you're like, you don't know it till you do it. And having had some success and failure in my life, it's not half of what you think it is. You're just watching television. Enjoy your ride on that damn ship. Go ahead.
Yeah, that takes luck and networking. And the other thing I tell people is you don't go from Compton to Cooperstown. It doesn't work like that. You got to be able to put in the effort, have a little luck, and be able to network your skills. And the reason I say Compton to Cooperstown is because I was stationed in Long Beach in 83 to 87 when Darryl Strawberry was coming up. Darryl Strawberry was a ghetto kid. You don't go from living in the ghetto of Compton to Cooperstown. You're going to get in trouble. You got to be able to avoid trouble, and then you got to educate yourself. So people, they say their morale is down. Man, your morale is down because you make it go down. You got to find a way to survive, to make this place better. Because listen, everybody complains. And I used to love complainers because, one, that gave you input, and two, that's the way that they were born. They were born to complain. I think in life, and I'm not, Socrates or Aristotle, but you need people that complain in your life because they're breathing. If they ain't complaining, they ain't breathing, I used to say.
Well, there's another thing, Billy. It's like when we look back and remember the old sailors used to tell us, the old chiefs and shit, like, you'll miss this when you get older. You don't even know. They tell me that because I get out after 6 years. They couldn't have been more right, but I didn't miss it for 20 years. And then I missed it. And in retrospect, so it's really, I saw my ship off with my shipmates. There's photos on the AE Sea Stories Facebook page. We saw it in Vallejo. It was pouring out of the mothball fleet. A guy get a call. I hadn't seen these guys in 20 something years. They go, hey man, ship's going to be scrapped. Come out and see Mount Hood, man. So about 20 of us met up over sitting on the pier, drinking beer, knocking golf balls at the ship over the fence. And the civilians that were going to tow it away to Texas were like, hey man, you guys need to get out of here. You can't be around the ship. We're like, that's our ship. You're just temporary, bro. You don't understand. We used to live there. We went to war there. That's our ship. You know what I mean? And, the cops showed up and we told them our story. They're like, yeah, screw those guys. It was funny. They called the cops on us. Yeah. They're like, what a bunch of weasels. They're like, what a bunch of weasels they are. So, but I understand the bond. And I've hung out with my shipmates in the last year, like once a month, almost every month. And we had a reunion with 125 people. And that's what got me to want to start the podcast. And now you found me. I don't know where you tell me in a second after I say this, but when you found me on the internet and you're going to start a podcast, and I want to highly support that because you're really good at this. I enjoy talking to you. And it's, I want more ships to come on board. I want us to all help each other out,
Yeah. So you can, it's great now.
Yeah. You have the battleship. I'll have the AEs, do the battleships because, so you can get guys from other battleships and compare notes because they're similar ships. That's my recommendation anyways.
Yeah.
Because for us to wait for each guy from each AE or each guy from each battleship might not happen in our lifetime. It takes a lot of initiative to do a podcast. You got to love it to do it. But this seems like something that's totally up your alley. I think you'd be great at it, man. It's been an easy podcast with you.
Chatting with people, man. And I really, really enjoyed my Navy career, man. I got to say, it was amazing.
That's the greatest thing. And if you could go back today, you probably would. But it wouldn't be the same Navy.
There's a book out there if you ever want to read it. It's called Paul's Case. So Paul is dealing with the devil, and the devil says, I'm going to let you go, but you have to start your life all over again. And guess what? He went back and did the same thing he was going to do before. So people do the same thing, man. The only way you change is if you come into a great lump sum of money, and that money doesn't even really change you that much.
Yeah, money is, it's, you know what? You're either born wealthy, you can make money as a new money person, but you never grew up in it. You're the guy that was hungry. Now you got some, but you're still not like the other kids that never had to work for it, that were given everything, that owned everything before you got there. It's going to always be like that. You can be nouveau riche. And, then you're trying to act like someone that you're not. So it is counterintuitive. Suddenly you're a billionaire.
And I want to tell you a quick story. So I get all this money right now and I feed homeless people. So I take my brother, because I was living in Portland, Maine not too long ago, and I took and then I moved back here to Baltimore, and then I said, Chuck, we got a weekend off. We should go to Portland, Maine. It's beautiful. This was in the summertime. He goes, all right, let's go. So I take him up there, and I said, come on, man, we're going to go feed homeless people. And he looked at me like I just lost a tooth. He goes, what are we doing? I go, we're going to go feed homeless people. You got to trust me. So I spent maybe $70. We made sandwiches. We did chips, Gatorade, and an orange. So we go up to Portland, Maine, and I know where all these homeless people hang out on this corner. And I'm out there feeding them, and Chucky couldn't believe that I was doing that. And we also did it while I was here in Baltimore as well. So any chance I get, man, I try to give back. And the thing of it is you can't really talk about it. I'm embarrassed to even talk about it, because if you talk about doing good, you're essentially bragging. You know what I mean?
No, I understand, but you're trying to also set an example for others to share in it, which is what you're really trying to do.
I encourage that, man. I encourage education now that I graduated from college. And I encourage just try to give back whatever you can when you can.
There is a pay it forward mentality. Yeah. And, the thing is with the Navy, if you ever needed another job, you can cook just about anywhere because you've been cooking for 20 years. Your resume should be just fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm never worried. I never cooked again when I got out. I worked at the Macaroni Grill for like 3 months, but after that, I never cooked, man, because cooking is hard work, man. People don't understand. You come home smelling all day. You stand for 12 hours a day, usually, because they always make you stay. One thing I learned about in the civilian world is people don't show up. The turnover's high, and they always make you stay late.
That's the thing about us Navy people is we like to usually be on time within the minute time frame. They're like, nobody's waiting too long. Nobody's getting the doubting Thomas thought. We're rolling. I've been very, I got into real estate for a while, did really well at it. Haven't done it in many years, but I was killing the game because I would always show up in my appointments, always be punctual, always be on time, always prioritize. And I noticed that there was a big lackadaisical culture in the civilian world because they had no guideline as to what the standard should be. But the military instilled a standard in me, and I had a very anal retentive chief who was all about the details. And he put some good values into me. When I was young, I resented him, and when I get older, I really appreciated him, So it's funny how that works out, right?
Yeah. And the thing of it is I'll never forget my first job when I got out of the military. I worked at Whole Foods. Right?
Yeah.
So here I am at Whole Foods, and everybody's getting high or drunk. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Is this what I did 20 years for? So you go to Whole Foods, everybody's getting high or drunk. They love their weed. They don't promote it, but they're not against it. It's not like they're coming out with a piss test once a week. You know what I mean? You're in the civilian world. No piss test unless you work in a federal government job or police. So I went to my manager, and she said, yeah, man. And guess what? Now you're doing overtime because nobody wants to show up for work.
Oh yeah. Nobody feels sorry for the strong horse.
Yeah.
That's the way I like to say it. Like you have all that hard military bearing, and you're the strong horse. So Billy could show up with a broken leg, but he's still going to tow the wagon better than all the other guys because they're too busy under a tree eating some grass. That's just how it works. So tell me about your idea for your podcast, because we're kind of pre-advertising it here. You want to talk to your battleship mates and tell me what you want to do, because I want to help you out.
I'd like to do some battleship stuff. I like to do the USS Stump maybe. And, even just Navy general, man. What 4 years were you in? How long did you stay in for? Because, Navy is basically a generalization. You got your AE, you got your CGs, you got your BBs, you got your SSBNs, you got your CVs, you got your CVNs. There's a whole bunch of types of ship, man. And, I'll do a generalization maybe, or maybe sports because I'm a big, huge sports fan,
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So getting back to this, I have a friend who's a famous sportscaster in San Francisco for California, for the Niners and the Raiders and all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And he wants me to help him, and I'm going to help him. He's already got a successful radio show, makes good money on the radio, biggest listenership out here. But we're all capable of telling a story. And exactly. The reason I pick sea stories is because it was life before the internet. That's one of the most captivating parts of our lives. What did you do before you weren't staring at your cell phone, sitting on your computer all day? And how did you navigate life? I mean, remember when we were young, we would keep like 20 phone numbers in our head. We would memorize a friggin' phone number on the spot, and we would be ready to, have full recall because we had to exercise our brain to be our hard drive, right? Uh-huh. And also we had to know our social security number, all this other stuff. People have everything in their phone. It becomes their external thumb drive of their brain, right? Their tertiary, whatever, hard drive. So we also had our own sense of adventure. We had to go by intuition. It was different. And our conversation skills were higher because we were not texting people every day, Exactly. So I think that's why we lived in that era. We are the lucky enough ones to talk to people about it and expose them to what once was, in a time when countries like South Korea and Japan are having people become internet addicts that have to go to rehab, and China by the millions, detached, So a good conversation. I'd rather you listen to this while you take a nice walk or a hike or, You're riding the metro to work and listen to some good stories. Or if you're a veteran, it nothing like good old sea stories, because we used to tell them to each other all the time at sea, right?
Yeah, man. Sea stories were amazing, man. There's so many out there that, that people getting drunk, some of the sea stories, the guys are like legendary, like some Paul Bunyan shit that you would hear. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
the guy was with 4 girls in one night. This guy can throw down a bottle of tequila, not a shot of tequila or 2 shots, but drink the whole bottle. Just some crazy stuff that's unbelievably that people would do, and that's where I came up with the Larry Flint thing. Like, Larry Flint made his millions by slushing on the mess decks. That's what a lot of people don't know. Because back in the day, like I was telling you earlier, we got paid in cash on the mess decks, and the guy's left there with his green book slushing the money. He needs his money back, and that's what guys did. Because, when you get to the Philippines, man, you could have $1 million and still run out in the night. Guys were throwing down ass. They were drinking, they almost close to getting married. You know what I mean? And they would do that, and then they'd be broke the next day.
That's so true. Billy, I think you're going to be great at this, and, I'll give you 100% support. I didn't pull more sea stories out of you because I know you got a lot of them, and I want you to save some content for your show too. But I think this is, after you sent me your video, people don't know this, but you're like, yeah, here's my video. You're in Hollywood Squares. I'm like, what a perfect guy, man. That was great. I can tell you had a good personality.
I didn't get one question right.
Isn't that funny?
Dude, my buddy puts that on at Christmas time every year. He goes, look, guys, know how to play tic-tac-toe.
It's funny. I mean, living in California, you can get on TV shows. If you hang out in Hollywood long enough, you have a 1 out of 4 chance probably.
Yeah.
But, if you're in Ohio or something, you're like, Billy was on television. It's like,
no, but you
might as well have been in the Blockbuster, right? You might have been on the Blockbuster, movie of the year.
Kind of ass part. You got to say Billy was on television and made an ass of himself.
Well, I really enjoyed doing this with you. Absolutely. And I'd like to do a longer one. I just have some things to do today, but I definitely want to do. I would like to have you on again, and I wouldn't mind. And this is just for people listening, because we may do this as we get to know each other. But I wouldn't mind co-hosting another podcast, a middle one that bridges ours together with like you, me, and I have another friend, Josh O'Brien, who's a comedian, and he was a CB who was also stationed in Puerto Rico one time. I had him on here. He's got a podcast 100 deep already too.
I would love to do a 3A with that guy for sure. Just let me know when.
Yeah, and that would be a cool way. There's a way to do 3 people on at once. I've never done one, but that'll be cool with this ringer that I have, a conference calling. But also the idea that I have was like back when I was in the Navy. So we have our ships, and then we have back when I was in the Navy, could be anything Navy, either us talking or us interviewing a guy from a different kind of ship or command. You know what I mean?
Dude, I would love to do a 3-way. Just let me know when. Just give me a little heads up, like a day or whatever.
It's perfect. And I really appreciate you being on, my man. I mean, this has been a great time. And hang on one second as I'm tuning this in. Is there anybody you want to give shots out to other than your friends that you already said earlier in the show?
No, man. And like I said, I was very, very happy to be in the Navy for 20 years. It kind of saved my life a little bit. And it taught me that there are a lot of other people in this country that are like me that just needed to step up. The Navy helped me definitely with a step up for sure.
I know what I'm calling this podcast, Battleship Billy.